All right, everybody, I do believe we are live. Welcome, welcome, and welcome to the Break the Rules stream, breaktherules.tv. For those watching that on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Patreon.com/breaktherules is where you go to support Break the Rules. And today we have a very special event. We have Luke Smith, Alexander Bard, two very fascinating human beings here on BTR. Finally, they shall meet, which has never happened before, and I don't think it ever would have happened until now. So, guys, I am a big admirer of a lot of things that you have to say. Luke, I know that you're very focused on maximizing personal freedom as far as not being dragged down by the software and by the technocracy. And Alexander Bard, you have a very interesting take on what is going to happen in the future with us and technology. So for those who do not know that much about yourself, Luke, what would be the best way to describe you if there was one thing that I could say or a couple of things that I have not said already?
Well, I don't really like being described. I think I'm a pretty normal person. I just happen to have a YouTube channel that people watch. I don't know. Like I really, there's this. I remember some anthropologists saying something that people in tribal cultures, they have a little trouble, describing their personality. They're like, I don't know, ask my friends, and I'm kind of the same way. I don't know. You'll have to. I'm just a person.
Well,
you'll know by the end of this stream.
Yes. Well, as far as occupation, let's say the thing that you do the most, what would you say it is? How you occupy your time? Yes.
Well, okay. I'll just say what people know me on YouTube for. I mean, originally I started out doing tech tutorials and things like that. And, whenever you're talking about technology, or at least, I think when a pensive person talks about technology, they really have to think about how it actually affects people's lives. So I think, kind of ironically, a lot of my channel has actually been very critical of the way that technology affects people's lives, be that social media, the kind of basic stuff like that, but also, what's the general direction that a lot of these technologies, without any kind of thoughtful analysis, what kind of world will they actually create if we leave them to, financially interested parties and things like that, right? So I talk a lot about that. I also have a podcast, and I have, I've just done a couple of different things on the internet over the couple of years that I've been, I guess, a kind of a public person on it. But ultimately, I do think it's important for the internet to be a very small part of any normal person's life. And so most of my life, I think that's, I don't really think of my internet existence as being primary in my life. I'll just say that, right? It's actually very awkward when I meet someone and someone tells someone that I'm a YouTube, quote unquote YouTuber, but that's how it is. So I mean, that's how I look at things, and I guess it'll be more clear as we talk about stuff, whatever questions you want to talk about.
Perfect. So. And also, last question about the tea. What kind of tea are you drinking there?
It's just green tea. I mean, it's just with honey in it. I usually try not to drink, but every once in a while I'll give myself a treat. But yeah, no, it's just green tea.
Sweet. So Alexander, how would you answer the question as far as your involvement in the internet? I mean, you are a philosopher, you are a writer, you are a musician, you are a lot of different things. But as far as you being online, how would you contrast to how Luke approaches this?
I think we're no longer Homo sapiens. I think we are Homo technologicus. I work in psychiatry with 20-year-old girls who've been basically fucked by Instagram for the past 5 or 6 years, and Instagram is also the only solution to their problems. They're stuck with it, and they regard their smartphone as a body part. And I think it's just the way it is. It's going to remain that way. We're not going to be less technological, but rather more, and that's because what we call civilization is entirely a technological phenomenon. We are reacting to technology the way we are reacting to nature. We are reacting to the very culture we've created. And because we've gone from being strictly in the natural environment to an environment that increasingly is cultural and therefore also symbolic and imaginary, that's the world we just live in, and we're going to have more of that. And the very problems we created, that's why I do psychiatry, for example. The very problems we create and need to solve are the problems we only have technological solutions to. So we are Homo technologicals. I'm sort of neutral about it. Personally, I live in Scandinavia. That's like living in Canada. It's just like I walk straight out into nature, and nature is just there around the corner. I love it. I need lots of it. I do meditation, contemplation, nature, and I realize this is what people did 5,000 years ago. It's no different. But then when I go back into the sort of urban digital environment where I have my career, where I make my money, where I have my friends and everything, this is an environment that is totally different from 100 years ago and vastly different from 4,000 years ago. And it's all down to technology. So I do philosophy, yes, but I'm a very Aristotelian philosopher in the sense that I think our ideas would all be the same ideas all over and over again if it wasn't for technological change that we had to adapt to. And the very adaptations to technology forces us to think novel thoughts. And I find that incredibly interesting.
Luke, do you agree with Alexander's assessment of us being this technological human being now moving into this next phase?
Well, no, but I mean, like, obviously, you know, technology has created an entirely new environment for us, but, you know, humans have not fundamentally changed. I mean, we've changed on the margins. Like with every generation, you know, there are, you know, genetic drifts and things like that that change, you know, what's our body structure, what kind of sexual dimorphism, you know, groups of humans that have been in civilization longer are more likely to have less sexual dimorphism, and, you know, their men are less likely to be more.
Look, I agree. I just interrupted. I agree entirely with you. My emphasis is that we have not changed at all. It is strictly only our technological environment that has changed. So I think we agree. I just want to point that out. Yeah.
Well, in that case, I mean, well, yeah, I was being sympathetic to you in saying that, but yeah, humans have not changed. And the important, as you mentioned in the case of the example of psychiatry, the world that we have created for this generation, we are not calibrated to. And thankfully, we have the ability to simply opt out of all of this. I mean, I think a lot of people feel like they can't opt out, but it's, you know, you can just abstain from that kind of stuff. And the real world is still at your beck and call. So in that sense, I don't really think humans are changing. Well, I don't think you really think humans themselves are changing to any degree. So I think the issue there, I mean, more, I guess what I mentioned about when I gave my first little talk there is, you know, I think humans are increasingly in a world that we're not psychologically fit for. And a lot of the, I don't know, a lot of the issues they have are the fact that a lot of people take technology as something that, oh, it's just a new thing, we're going to do it. We can do things in technology, therefore we should. And it leads them to a lot of psychological issues. It leads them to health issues. It leads them to trust the system, quote unquote, too much. So that's partially what I talk about. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that the use of mass technology is something singular or inevitable. I mean, it's more now than it was 100 years ago, and it seems to be in a trend over the past couple of 100 years. But I think the issue with technology and the society that it creates is it creates a society that's, you know, more fragile. You know, obviously in the past 50 years, this, you know, for people my age and younger, we don't care about it. But theoretically, we now have technology in the case of nuclear weapons and actually other things that could easily destroy our society, destroy the entire world as we know it. And so my way of looking at things is I think technology often seems like it's creating some kind of inevitable dystopia, but dystopia is not, it's not robust in the way that a tribal society is. It's uniquely liable to, I don't know, have unexpected issues and run into the constant issues of, you know, again, our psychology not being fit for it. And that I think is something that's already happening right now. And I think it will only increase in the future. Even though, and hopefully what we get out of this is we do have technology that we can use to do nice things. You know, we can do math effectively.
Oh, give it a second. He'll be back. Everybody subscribe right now if you're listening to this. Luke is having a little webcam issue, but he is going to be right back. I don't know what's going on there. But
he looks good on stills, though.
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Look,
you're back.
Look, that was a really good still shot of you there when we lost you. So
oh yeah. Well, I was basically done saying what I was going to say. So
my point is this: that Yeah, but it's kind of a luxury position to say you can afford to be a shamanic hermit and just exclude yourself from the online world, since the online world generates all new jobs and careers. Say you go with me, for example, Luke, to Brazil, and we go into the jungle in Amazon, and I love being there, right? And you live with a tribe. And, they love their Wi-Fi. They love their smartphone. They all move to Iquitos, the city. It's messy. It's a bit like 19th century London or something like that, because it's a messy city. It's third world, right? They definitely prefer to live to the village with the tribe. It's just, but they can stay tribal because they've learned from our previous experiences. So I think it's a dialectical process, but I think it's important right now to discuss digital a bit like the cities were in Europe, say 300 years ago. So when people started moving into cities in the 18th and 19th century, these cities were incredibly dirty. They were loaded with shit. People died like mad. The first city in the world that could sustain its own population without just luring people in from the countryside was Hamburg in 1898. Until 1898, all cities had such a bad health record that people just died in droves, right? So I think digital is similar in the sense that I wrote a book called Digital Libido, that basically says that the next 50 to 100 years are going to be very, 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 very messy. And that's why I work with psychiatry and these things. But there's a dialectical process. We also learn as we go along. And that's what we're learning as we go along. And okay, we made a lot of mistakes. We did that 10 years ago. We don't do that any longer. We do this instead. And that dialectical process eventually, hopefully faster than 200 years, will for the vast majority of people create an environment where the digital interacts with the physical in a way that actually makes sense to people, that works and creates at least what people think is some kind of beneficial value to them. So I think right now, because we're at the sort of very early stages, it's going to be very messy, and it's going to get messier still. But it's not technology per se. It's the fact that we don't even know where we're at. And I think what's interesting here is that when I agree with you, Luke, and I've followed you a lot, is that I'm fighting for something that I call the free and open algorithm. Elon Musk and a few other guys have joined the crusade by now. And what we mean with that is that we like digital to be digital on its own without interference from the previous institutions. Because what we're seeing right now is that the old institutions, which is politics, academia, mass media goes with academia, and old industry, they're all attacking the internet. They're moralizing against it. A bit like, the nobility in Versailles would, moralize against the people in the streets of Paris in 1789. Although we now know that the streets of Paris in 1789 where it was all at, because people could read and write and count and had tabloids in their hands and had encyclopedias in their hands. And therefore they won over the guys in Versailles, who basically were literate, noble idiots, right? So it's a bit like that it's the manipulation of politics that we need to be terrified of today. It is the corruption of money that we need to be terrified of today. And it's the conformation of the academic world and mass media. We must all be the same. It's those three forces that call manipulation, corruption, and conformation. And they're all coming from the old institutions that are literally dying, because digital has arrived and will crush everything in its way. And if digital gets to establish itself, especially if we allow it to be as free and open as possible for as long as it possibly can, which is the exact opposite of communist China. Like if you could have a vision of a free and open algorithm as a standard for people, like your algorithm reflects you and not some kind of person out there who wants to control you. But if that could be the case for the next 50 years, we could create something quite amazing out of it.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with the idea that there's some kind of dialectic process in, how we choose to implement technology. I think I would add to that. I don't know if you disagree or not, but on one level, I don't think that, if we look 200 years in the future after comfortable dialectical change, I don't really think that human life is going to be that different. We're probably going to be doing things more efficiently in terms of computation. But I definitely don't want to give forth the idea that I think that humankind is going to be something fun. I'm not like a transhumanist, you know what I mean? And I think I'm definitely not a big fan of that. I don't know if I don't get those vibes from you, but I'll just say that.
I was one of the co-founders, but I left.
Oh, okay.
It was going way too Platonist for me and not Hegelian. So
but I was also going to say, I think also, I mean, you kind of criticize what China is doing. You want to open and standard and stuff like that. I would say that I think already there's a lot. I haven't actually drunk any of this tea. There's a lot of experimentation we've really already done with technology. And I think there is a lot of interventions that we can already make that are very sensible. For example, I mean, just right off the top of my head, this isn't like a serious, well, maybe it is a serious thing, but, I think it's very reasonable to, ensure that children shouldn't have access to smartphones, for example, or little things like that. And this is just an example. This is not me staking my ego on it, but I do think when I look at China's actually tried to do things like this. Like they have tried to say children can't play so many hours of video games a week and stuff like that. I don't think that's enough thing, because I think already we've lived in a digital era so long that we already know what the really bad things are. And I feel the same way about, pornography and some of this kind of stuff. And I do think there are these people who are very antsy about that, who are more like, they take this rigid libertarian line that we have to jump into whatever Lovecraftian chasm and just deal with the consequences. And I'm not like that. I do think that there are.
Again with the webcam.
He does make really good stills,
Yes.
though. I have to admit that. Luke is great on stills,
Luke's good. Absolutely. So if you guys are enjoying this once again, patreon.com/breaktherules, become a patron, add a like, that helps the algorithm out. Luke's going to be back with us, no problem. I don't know if Luke's in the middle of nowhere, but it is very interesting what he brings in. Before Luke comes back, one of the areas I want to take this conversation will be the subject of religion, but we'll get that later because Luke is back with us. So go for it, Luke.
Yeah, that's going to be a regular thing. I just disappear every couple of minutes. That's how this internet is.
I agree. I agree with Luke.
Humans
are not going to change much. They haven't changed much, and even if we do, we move humans into labs and we create wombs that are artificial, so women can be free to do whatever they like. We're still going to have the same babies anyway. Basically, it's not going to be that different. All those things we could possibly imagine to do with human bodies before they're born is strictly superficial, right? But the environment around us will radically change, and it'll be much more technology driven. It'll be drenched in technology. If you manage even to get something like nuclear fusion power around the corner, like that's a design problem. If that's solved in the next 20 to 30 years, I can't even imagine how different our environment will be. So the environment around us will be radically different in the future, but we will be the same as humans. I think eventually AI will conquer outer space and take over the world and leave us humans as some kind of a human zoo and say that you can be the same, you can still be the same. And a bit like white rhinos today, hopefully you survive or something. And then we have a little zoo on planet Earth, and we can come and laugh at you sometimes. And we get to fuck and do our usual dramas and routines and things. And we won't change. But we will create technologies that will take off on their own. And I think that is I'm not deterministic. I'm just saying it's very, very, very likely that we are about to create technologies that take off on their own. And that could, of course, lead to our own death, our own extinction. And I think it's a risk we're going to take because we're not in control of this. We just create it anyway. And I think that's why I wrote this book called Syntheism, where I said that God is actually a word we need to retake, but God is not something from the past. We didn't need God for the universe to exist to begin with. And, well, then the universe itself can be God, creating itself, if you like, but it's the only position that could be okay, philosophically speaking. No, rather, God is a great word for something we're moving towards. So we're about to create God, and we have no idea what kind of God that will be, except that it'll be incredibly powerful and probably unified. And that God will then take off and do what God wants, and we have no idea. That's where we're heading.
I am very curious about what Luke's going to say now, especially considering the difference here in terms of belief. I mean, the definition of God. I don't know, Luke, you could take this conversation anywhere you would want to, but regarding what Alexander just said right now about the nature of existence, I would be curious if you could contrast his vision with what you see is going on here.
Well, I missed probably half of that in my internet, but I mean, I will say that obviously I hope that is not true, that technology will exceed far beyond. And as I said before, I think there are reasons to think that the technological system is uniquely fragile. We look at it and we see this permanence in it. We have this idea that the internet and AI and all these things are going to advance past what we're where we are. But I mean, we all need to make sure that we're hoping and fighting to make sure that is not the case, because I think if I don't know, your description I think is a lot of people would talk about what you just said as being a fantastic thing. Oh my goodness, AI is going to, explore space or something like that. And that's humans living for technology and not really the reverse. And that's probably the worst case view in my mind. The rest of that stuff I didn't really.
I was very neutral. So I'm not saying pro or con. I think it's more interesting to be in a neutral place. We discuss possible scenarios. The way Jan Söderqvist and I described it is this: woman gives birth to child. Man envies woman for giving birth to child. Man therefore gives birth to technology. Since technology does develop over time, whereas child does not develop at all, it is literally in the equation only a matter of time before technology develops beyond child. If that means the end of child or not is an open question. And that's just a logical equation. That makes actually perfect sense if you look at history over the last 4,000 years. And it's an equation that looks increasingly true if you look at the world of the last 100 years. You're absolutely right. The most important date in contemporary history is August the 6th, 1945 in Hiroshima. It's not climate change. That's just costly. It requires adaptability. The real threat is the nuclear bomb. And the spread of the nuclear bomb could basically make at least humanity go extinct, even if the internet survives it. Yeah? But the question here is then, what kind of technologies do we to begin with create that locks up the nuclear bomb so that they don't go off? And right now with Putin and Russia, we have a very acute situation where actually the bomb could be pulled, by a guy who's actually a feudal tyrant who looks like he was from like 600 years ago. So that's how vulnerable we are. That's how fragile human beings are. That's how stupid we are. So instead of saying technology is fragile, we should discuss how fragile we are in that sense. But if you want to create an anti-fragile system, a resilient system, and just secure survival, we might as well secure survival both for ourselves and technology as our partner. And in that case, that can be programmed into an AI. And that would be the AI that could even save the world from us blowing up the bombs. So it's something more like that I do when I do what I call syntheology. I very, very openly, in as neutral way possible, discuss the capacity of technology in relation to human beings. And I leave human beings as a constant, which means I never try to change a single human being in my work. If anybody wants to change their mind, that's up to them. I'm just literally just trying to lay out the possible landscapes ahead of them for themselves and their children, etc. And that landscape is certainly one that has to include the syntheological perspective now, because with technology taking off the way it does at the moment, in certain departments, it's going to race off in such a way that we will no longer understand what technology even does.
Would this change, by the way, in any way, if we throw in belief of there being some higher power? So from what I understand, Luke, you are a Christian. You are not a materialist. I am curious about what your take is on what Alexander was talking about through this framework of believing that there is some higher power out there and whether that would affect whatever ends up happening with technology.
I mean, it doesn't... I wouldn't say that it makes a massive... well, it depends on your idea of what God is. But by itself, I don't think it really makes a big difference. I'm not one of these people who, is in the business of making very specific claims about what the future is going to hold. In fact, I'm really the opposite of that. I don't know if you can tell from what I say. And this isn't a religious belief or some kind of atheistic belief. I think it's just I look at this future and I see uncertainty. And not just uncertainty, but uncertainties that I can't necessarily see yet. I mean, you talked about nuclear weaponry as an issue, but as well, I mean, there could be, we could find some homemade way of blowing up the universe at some point. We have no idea what kind of boxes we can open. Now, as to, I missed some of it when he was saying it before. It was cutting off, but what is this about, like technology, like as a god, or what is this about? I missed that.
Okay, it starts with the idea that God is too important a word to leave to the religious. It's a quote by Quentin Melassu, French philosopher, 2006. Fantastic quote. So the work we do now as philosophers of technology, and this is, for example, my book Synthesis with Jan Söderqvist, deals with that we can put the God name in the future. It's a bit like the Hebrews did when they left Egypt. And obviously, if you're a Christian, you know that history really well. So God was just a name of the place that we're going to. It's called the Promised Land. Why is it called the Promised Land? It was promised by God. Why? Because the people would then walk there and build the temple, so finally God would have a house. You'd create a house of God. You couldn't do it in Egypt. You had to leave. You had to go somewhere else. So there was an exodus here. It's an exodological movement, which is the basis of Judaism and the basis of brilliant religion. So you leave. You could also look at that, instead of looking at territorially, you could look at it paradigmatically. You leave an old era to walk into a new era. So the metaphor is that we're leaving an old faith, which is Egyptian polytheism. We're now the cult establishing a new monotheism, and we're therefore going to leave Egypt because we can't live here. We turn into slaves if we live here, like the Attentionists of Egypt probably were the origin of the Hebrews. They left, merged with Canaan and other cultures, and created a culture, which what I called a split but unified God. Split but unified God, split phallus within the God. And those religions make perfect sense to me. And that's what they created. That's Judaism. And I think today we can take that back and say that why don't we go exodological again and put the God word into the future and say, if God is the machine we eventually create, and we are already now responsible for creating, because we're going to give birth to that machine, we might as well be aware of that because we are actually involved in the very design of God. And if we are involved in the design of God, that means that's sacred work. And we be very, very careful because we already created a demon called the atomic bomb that can blow us up at any time. And therefore, God must be different from the demon we just created.
I don't know if Luke is thinking right now, but that is a good
I
post.
think a demon has obsessed his wife. There it is. Oh, that's a good position, Luke.
Yes.
There we go. Did you hear what I just said, or should I repeat it?
The last 10 seconds or so, you can repeat.
Okay, so God is a good name to put into the future. By the way, I'm a Zoroastrian myself, converted in 1992, so I respect your Christian position. So I think anybody should get fucking religion to get their act together. But I'm a Zoroastrian, which is older than both Judaism and Christianity. So I converted to Zoroastrianism. But I did it because philosophically it makes sense to me to be in that position. But I think God is a great word to put towards the future, because once you talk to technologists about God in this sense and said Syntheos, the God that we create, and put it into the future, it makes everybody involved in that process feel a lot more responsible for what they're doing. It is a great way of doing theology, I think. Since theology is the ultimate philosophy. It's the ultimate philosophy. How are you responsible towards your tribe? How are you responsible in your life towards your community? That's ultimately what theology deals with.
Okay. Well, I guess you want my response to that or something? Well, I mean, if you use the word God like that, you use the word God like that. But I mean, that's arguably, I guess, the opposite of how I would use the word God. I mean, meaning, something outside of material causality that created the universe, as opposed to, some kind of creative entity that just has lots of power or something like that. Well, actually, we do have a word for that in Christianity. It's called the Antichrist. That's actually a pretty good example of, I don't know, that basically a massive technological panopticon that controls the world. I guess we do have a concept for that. I don't know. And of course, I guess in Christian teaching, right, that's something that's going to happen. But
but then you agree with me, you're a syntheologist, because you are agreeing with me that you're warning people about the consequences of technological change in their environment.
Oh, you could. Oh, I'm just saying you could have.
Except that you place God in the past. The great thing with Zoroastrianism is to have both gods, because God is split in that sense. Zoroastrianism has a split within God between the Ahura and the Master. The Ahura is being, self, what exists, and Master is mind. So God has to be both mind and existence, the way we are as human beings. Ironically speaking, we are ourselves mind and existence at the same time. So it's a reflection of that. And religion has to be based on the idea that we're dealing with two different things. We're dealing with mind, the capacity of mind, capacity of ideas, capacity of engineering technologies, and then we're dealing with existence itself. Once the machine is there, it runs itself. There's no turning back, for example.
But you don't put any faith into the idea of there being a God outside of the creation or outside of his creation.
No. Zoroastrianism completely denies the supernatural. Completely. It's just, oh God, rubbish. It's just astrology, whatever. It's just like, no, you're in here in the world and you can figure out how the world operates and works. And therefore you go on. This is the birth of science. It started with Zoroastrianism. The idea that you can explore the world and find out how it works. And then you're co-creating the world together with other human beings. The divine lies in the tribal, the divine lies in us co-creating the world. It's called the Anjuman in Zoroastrianism. It's the origin also of the Jewish congregation. It's the origin of the Christian congregation. It's the origin of the Islamic Ummah. The idea in the West, for example, that the congregation is the center of a society, which is a tribe of believers. And the origin of the tribe of believers is a Persian idea.
So, Luke, beyond faith, would there be any way to get either Alexander, I'm not going to say get Alexander to change his mind, but at least introduce certain things for people to think about for accepting more of a, I don't even know if supernatural is the right word. You tell me, like what exactly could be said here.
Well, I don't purport to know exactly what he's thinking, so it's not really my business. And supernatural, I don't know, what do you mean by supernatural? I mean, like...
So, Alexander, how would you define supernatural, just so we're clear?
Ask the people who believe in it, because everything that does have an ontic existence is natural. But we can imagine things that do not exist in an ontic way. Therefore, ontology stretches further than the ontic. So once you move outside of the ontic, which is basically the things you run into if you run ahead of something, say a wall, it's probably very ontic, but the ontology is that the wall could be totally different than what it is today. So you can imagine things that aren't there. Therefore, ontology can include things you can imagine that do not exist per se ontically. And the thing with people who believe in supernature is that they have this incredibly incessant idea that there must be something else with the ontic and the ontological world. And that idea, what they want to have, is usually something they've lost, and therefore they want to return to it. And that's why I believe in psychoanalysis. They miss their mother's tit, they miss their mother's womb, or they miss something else. They miss somebody who died who will never return or something like that. And the explanations, therefore, of the supernatural, belief in the supernatural, comes in that I don't want to die when I die, so I imagine there's an afterlife, or that I'm reincarnated. All those ideas are ideas of the supernatural.
Luke, any response to that?
I mean, it's just psychoanalysis of people. I don't purport to I don't agree with that, but I mean, I don't.
No, I don't. I'm not requiring any psychoanalysis of Alexander Bard. More around just the philosophy. Do you understand where Alexander is coming from here, and what would be your response to this to the philosophical idea?
What do you want specifically? Like, I'm not.
I want you to defend God. That's what. That's
no.
what
I'm not interested in having that conversation. Like, I'm not.
Why don't we go back instead, Lev, to where we started? I want to know why Luke is doing his YouTube podcast.
All right, let's go for that.
I want to know what drives Luke. I think that's an interesting question.
I don't know. I just do videos when I feel like it. That's it. I don't.
So are you a video camera fetishist or?
Am I what?
Are you a video camera fetishist? Is it the video camera that you're attached
No,
to?
I actually hate. If I had one regret, I would actually probably do my channel anonymously, because I do feel that being in front of a camera and having a name and a personality, I think that's kind of counterproductive. Now, at this point for me, it's too late, but I don't know. I've gotten used to it. And I will say, when I first started doing it, I really hated recording videos, but I've gotten used to it to the extent that I can do it. But I actually decidedly don't like recording videos and stuff like that. I'm kind of an anti-fetishist, I guess. And there are actually lots of videos that I record and I'm like, oh, that's stupid. I'm not going to put that up. So the introduction.
What do you like that you could address in public and talk?
Do I like what?
What do you like in life that you could be okay with telling us in public?
I don't know. Like, as I said before, I'm pretty a private person. I don't put my stuff on the internet. So.
Well, one thing I definitely like that Luke does is encouraging people, like I said in the very beginning, to live in a freer way when it comes to what software they use, when it comes to privacy. But like we said in the beginning of the show, where exactly people are headed with this increasing technological surveillance, as far as people having far less privacy and more transparency, do you, Luke, personally see this being a matter of technocracy rising, like you just said in a recent stream of yours, without the people being able to do that much about it? Or do you give some room for there being enough transparency that's going to come where, let's say, we'll be able to watch The Watchmen and we'll be able to hold people to certain standards through that process?
I mean, I definitely feel like, I think a lot of people look at technological developments and they say, oh my goodness, things are so much worse now, like in terms of privacy and stuff like this. But the reality is we've never had better technology now for peer-to-peer communication, peer-to-peer financial transfers, doing things in a privacy respecting way. It's just, I guess you have to know what to look for at this point. A lot of this technology is even just as easy to use as, anything else. I think mostly people who are kind of plugged into the control grid, they're kind of doing so voluntarily or just because they don't care enough to counteract it. I guess that's my view. So I'm not like, I'm actually very happy in the kind of technological tools that are out there for people to achieve privacy. I think the issue is kind of, weirdly enough, raising awareness. I guess there's a sense in which I do that, but it's something I do by accident, really. I mean, I didn't start my channel to kind of, I did tech tutorials kind of assuming that people would be interested in this kind of stuff. And I do talk about these issues, but I mean, there are other people on YouTube who are more privacy. Before also, as a person, I don't mind people seeing my face and stuff like that. Privacy, I think, to a lot of people is not really that important. But what I do value is systemic privacy. The fact that we live in a world where, there are not like liabilities in everyone's life that can be exploited in metadata, or you can use an AI network to, harm people and stuff like that. Those are the things, if you're interested in privacy, that's why I would be interested in it. Not necessarily.
Everybody subscribe. After he gets back, I want to ask Alexander you something as well regarding this. Here we go. Luke is back.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, as I was saying, like, people who are watching this, who are on the internet, our privacy is basically compromised. But the technology is already out there for us to create an environment where people around us and our children can live in a more privacy respecting way, like the peer-to-peer and federated technology, even some blockchain projects. They're very good at restoring, I guess what I would think of as being normalcy, in terms of we can interact in a privacy respecting way, or not just about privacy, but we can act using technology that we control in the future, and we can do it better, just so long as we know what we're doing. It takes a little, you have to jump out of the matrix, so to speak, but it's not a difficult thing, So yeah, I forget what the original question was, but that's my response.
Well, one of the things that I really enjoyed in a recent video of yours when you were talking about Monero, comparing that to Bitcoin, as you were pointing out how vulnerable Bitcoin is to invading one's privacy as far as the purchases that people make. And that got me thinking, in the future, if this is going to be a lot easier for any Tom, Dick, and Harry to just pull up their neighbor's history of what exactly they bought, that would encourage the other people to have a certain limit to what they're even going to allow themselves to not just look up, but to purchase as far as literature, as far as different ideas. And that may create a really bad chilling effect when it comes to making more of these hive minds. So yeah.
A recurring issue in technology is that obviously there are businesses and a lot of people who have kind of a set interest. And often in technology, the easiest way to do something is a way that sacrifices privacy, or that puts your users at risk, or makes them overly reliant on you for financial reasons. Okay, I will just say that what often happens in the case of Bitcoin. Bitcoin came out, it did this, it was this new innovation, but there are so many patches you have to put on it to make it actually privacy respecting. And it's been the same way with social media. Social media did a whole bunch of things when it came out. And now we're starting to realize all the terrible things that, it's causing us. And now we can start thinking, oh, well, we could federate this. We could have peer-to-peer social media, we could just stop using the internet for some of this stuff. So that's off.
Again with the freeze. I'm going to ask you the question. Oh, there we go.
But so the first name in the game is often, you know, a software that's bad for you. But the software that comes up later on that, you know, a lot of times, you know, more hackerish people or people who are more in the know, that will be much better for, I guess, your, what's the word I'm looking for? The particular, I guess, the elite taste people. Mm. And I hope in a lot of cases, more of that technology will catch on. But
this is exactly why the old institutions are terrified of Monero. It's exactly why. And of course, they will say that Monero requires more energy to work than any of the other systems, etc., precisely because it's so dead tight, right? And they're terrified of it because Monero actually is the dream of any anarchist in history, that Monero could exist in the first place. But that's exactly why it's philosophically interesting as a platform as well.
Yeah, and the same thing has happened in, I mean, it's crazy to think in the 90s, if you saw that talk that I did before, you know, in the 90s, basically all internet traffic was unencrypted. That's insane. I mean, that basically means that the government watches everything you do. Now they can watch what they do, what you do if Google gives them that information, but normal internet traffic is entirely encrypted now. That's a massive benefit for us. That has changed the world. And actually the internet itself, it has been improved because of that. You would not do credit card payment online at all if we didn't have that. It's actually better even for the bad guys in a way. It's better for everyone. So these better standards actually do eventually take on, but you know, it takes some time. A lot of times we have to deal with the messiness of technology, right?
But I agree with you entirely. And what's great about humans is that once you make people aware, and that's where you do great work, Luke, once you make people aware of the situation, how things work, what alternatives are, they will always go for, no, I don't want anybody to eavesdrop on me. It's just like, no, I don't want the whole world to walk into my dinner party. I always use the nightclub in my work to kind of make it in a metaphor. It's just like a really good nightclub has a really good door guy, right? The door guy is the key. He doesn't let anybody in that shouldn't be there in the first place. And he does take a few risks because otherwise the club would be too predictable and not fun enough. But he also takes those risks fully aware that he can walk into the club and take somebody, grab them and throw them out of there because he's allowed to do that if they misbehave. That's a good door guy. And therefore also often inside the club have next the VIP lounge. The VIP lounge, of course, for the most loyal people who come to the club all the time and support it and put their life and energy into it. But it's also for the funniest, quirkiest guests that pull in the rest of the crowd. Now, that's how you run a great nightclub. Now, if you can allow people to pay their way through, so anybody can get into the nightclub if you pay a ticket. Anybody can get into the VIP lounge if you pay a second ticket, which is more expensive. You know the nightclub is going to be ruined by Russian oligarchs and hookers in no time at all, right? It won't work. And that's exactly why capitalism has its limit, and what I call attentionalism is the future. Attentionalism is everything about credibility. And the credibility here, what's interesting with credibility once you start looking at it thoroughly, is credibility starts with people having integrity enough to be concerned with their privacy. Because if they're concerned with what's private to them and what people won't get in, they also have a sense of what's sacred to them and not profane. And for people who can point out what's private and what's sacred to me, which is kind of religious, spiritual things, people who can point that out and say, this is private, this is sacred to me, you're not getting in here. Nobody's getting in here. People who have that integrity do that and have enormous attention to get out of that. So they will be very, very powerful, even if indirectly, as we go forward and start exploring digital. Yeah. I think crypto and these things are just the technological attachments to really human fantasy. We could actually value things properly instead of speculatively. And that's why it's so hurting for people to see the speculative bubbles over Bitcoin and things are right now the mode. But we all know that behind that, the blockchain is something entirely different from that. And blockchain has the capacity to be something entirely different from Bitcoin speculation bubbles or whatever that is right now. But I agree with you, Bitcoin is dead and over because Bitcoin is neither of the two. Bitcoin is neither the Monero, which is total protection and massive experiment in anarchy, and people might start killing each other, ordering each other's deaths, and we can find out who ordered the killing. Yeah, that's what anarchy is. But on the other hand, you also have things, and much more agile things, smoother things than Bitcoin, that operate very professionally, very fast. And those are the alternatives. And since we're building these, eventually the central banks of the world are going to run onto the stage and create Soviet-style forced currencies, cryptocurrencies that will try to force us to use. The Chinese are doing already.
And would those be the slaves then?
Those technologies will be so fucking clumsy that by then I totally believe that we will have created the alternatives in the crypto markets as well, which is an open field, open for trade, globally open, that people can use.
How do you see the masses being affected by a lot of this stuff, since the title of this specific program is Masters and Slaves? So as far as what happens to the people who end up being the slaves, where do you see this going?
Awareness is key to not be a slave, but to be a master. Enlightenment. Listen to Luke.
Yes.
Learn how you protect yourself, your privacy, create a sacred sphere around yourself, have a strong sense of family and clan that nobody's going to get inside. It's just fundamentally human tribal structure. Go back to that. Get it right away. Once you have that established around you, you can even create your own fucking communist utopia for the people you love, right? You can have that. But you have a strong membrane. We work with membranics in our philosophy. What constitutes a good membrane? What kind of old bitchy old lady do you want to have at the door who says, you're not getting in here, you're getting in here? You know, how do we get nutrition in and how do we get the shit out? That's a good membrane. And a good membrane has a sacred private sphere inside of it, and that allows for a profane, you know, sphere outside of it that, you know, where regular social life goes on. But that sense of privacy is what Luke is about, I think, and I respect him for it.
There was a comment over here in the chat, and by the way, sneed those super chats, everybody. It's a new month. It's Gay Pride Month. We got to get into all of these super chats so that I will be very gay as and happy by the end of it from all the super chats. Anyway, Joseph says traditional futurism. I guess that may be one way of calling what Alexander was talking about. But what still concerns me is the question of the masses, because if you just have these small structures where it takes a very it takes a very thorough process in order to get somebody into these clubs, what of the people who don't go in? How much trouble would they be able to create for either these clubs or for the world in general if you just have so many people who are in this chaotic state? And I don't know if that's going to be the majority of people, but I am kind of curious what is going to happen to most of the people who don't end up going into, who don't end up following Luke's advice, for lack of a better word.
Well, they end up standing in the nightclub queue and they never get in. And what do you do with them? If you're in power, you sedate them so they become less of a problem. You basically throw entertainment at them. That's what we do today to keep them calm.
Luke, do you see that as being the way out?
No, not the way out. I'm just saying that's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not something I propose or defend. It's just that I think that's what's going to happen.
Do you see it as being the inevitable way these things are going to work?
It's the path of least resistance. I think it's definitely true that, I mean, as I said before, we have now, I mean, things are bad in many ways right now. You know, we are living more so than any time in human history. A lot of our autonomy as individuals is under siege, but we also arguably are living in the best time because we have enough technology to be more independent. I mean, you know, someone like me can, or really, there are lots of people who live how they want to live. They can make money off the internet. They can do all these things to make themselves more independent. While, you know, they can use technology to their benefit if they're using it well. And that's not really an issue for them. But yeah, there are the vast majority of people, and including, I don't know, people who might have their heart in the right places, but don't want to make sacrifices or don't want to, I don't know, really unplug from the system. Yeah, they are basically going to have to be sedated. They're the people right now, you know,
Everybody subscribe. Everybody subscribe. Add a like. Do it now. Sneed those super chats. Sneed those super chats. We got to have the super chats because it's the beginning of the month and it's got to fill in. And if you send the most, you become king of super chats. Anyway, Luke, go for it.
Where was I? No, I think I was done saying what I said. But, you know, there are going to be a lot of people who do take that path of least resistance where they are just going to watch Netflix. They're going to watch porn. They're going to smoke weed, just relax all day, live off of, you know, whatever, some joke of a job. And kind of, I mean, the thing that's infuriating about that mindset, which is very, very much common, is we have, like, things are bad, but we have more abilities to be it's so much easier to be independent. Like 100 years ago, many people were financially independent because they worked every day in the fields, because they did hard labor and had craftsmanship that they had for generations. Well, now you can do that. Even you can make your own way in the world using technology with a whole lot less effort, and you really don't have an excuse. That's probably the worst thing for some people. They don't have excuses in most cases. So so I do think there is going to be a bifurcation of society in some degree, but I do hope that as time goes on, we can create institutions for that make it more accessible to normies, so they don't have to be these people who are plugged in kind of subsidiaries of the system, and that's kind of implicitly that's my goal. I want to make things easier for people who are kind of wavering on the sidelines, who otherwise are just going to be, I'm just going to go along and do a normal life, do a normal 9 to 5, that kind of stuff,
And you are also
they'll become Uber drivers and things like that. They'll still be connected, but they'll be less connected. So they won't have their social life and social identity online. They will use the online world basically as a series of apps or something like that, but they can have a daily life and go with it. We divided this in a book called The Netocrats 22 years ago, Jan Söderqvist and I, and we said that we have to think the class structure will return. And then we defined a digital upper class we call the netocrats. And that's now being divided into 3 different categories, the kind of work we do today, 20 years later. And then we said, but the masses will be a consumptariat. They'll be united through their consumption of media and culture. And that will be the unifying factor of them. And that's essentially what has happened. We have a consumptariat the vast majority of people belong to, have high respect for people who are consumptarians. But what we do have, even if class difference is bigger than ever, what we do have and will have from now on is a pure meritocracy. If it turns out that wherever you are in the world and you do something quite remarkable that gets a reaction against the attention of other people, you'll be discovered in no time at all. Because these days, you'll be absorbed into the system because you are a talent that has a large following or has a reaction within a certain part of the population. Therefore, you can become a leader within the community. So the thing is, what's great about history right now is that for the first time ever, due to technology and the sort of phallic gaze technology has, the satellites are watching us all the time. And what's great with that is that if you are talented doing something anywhere you live in the world, you will be discovered in your own lifetime. That was unthinkable in the past. If you didn't live in California or Germany, you'd be out of the way. Right? You can live in Kenya, you can live in southern India, you can live anywhere you want in the world today. As long as you do something that makes a mark and gets what we call an attentionalist reaction, you can have a career.
Yeah. Well, beyond the attentionalist reactions, there was a very interesting video Luke did where you were criticizing the Open Society and its enemies by Karl Popper, and you were talking about Karl Popper's idea of this organic society, even though you didn't want to use that particular term to describe it. Do you feel like people who would be in these positions, whether or not they're going to be in the masses or be within these clubs, whether there is going to be this aspect of organic society that's going to be missing, or is there a way for that to be integrated through what Alexander was talking about, to go back to that?
Well, to some degree, I'll say that I could be an example of that, because I have a pretty significant online existence, which doesn't really overlap with my participation in organic society. I do a lot of things. I mean, all of my personal life, my friends and acquaintances and what I do in I guess, social institutions around here, that is not public information. And I still am a part of that. It just happens to be that, I might do something online. I might have some websites or do this or that, or have some kind of business venture, right? So I think that you can have some degree of meritocracy and a kind of open, we can have the internet. It's just, I think that it's very important for us to keep the internet and real life in different categories. That's really my view. And it used to be that people who took there used to be the expression on the internet, the internet is serious business. And people said that because it obviously is not true.
They also...
That's a stream you ought to cut him short. Oh,
yes.
Oh God. We got a ghost in the machine here.
They also say there are no women on the internet. That's another famous one. Which it doesn't mean that... Yeah.
Luke, you're back, right?
Luke, Luke, what's going on, buddy?
We got to round it off anyway, Lev.
Yes. No, we're gonna be finishing up pretty soon. And once again, if anybody's in any super chats, need those super chats. What I also wanted to get into here regarding this new environment that we're going into is what is going to be happening with the people who right now are oh boy. All right, let's see if we can get Luke back in here, because I really wanted to ask him that. But, okay, before I get into my question, Alexander, do you have any thoughts on what Luke was talking about right now regarding also Karl Popper and the open society and this idea of having these organic...
Okay, I am skeptical of Karl Popper's ideas. I think it's a Christian heritage, and the fantasy about the open society is the fantasy about the cult of transparency, as I call it. I don't mind transparency at all, and it's certainly necessary to expose power, whatever power is up to, right? But the cult of transparency has a limit, and that's exactly what I call the private and the sacred. And when I made my career in the music industry, I was very lucky to have an older brother who basically taught me everything before I became successful. And the first thing he taught me is that you're going to be a huge star eventually, but never, ever allow a journalist into your house. Never, ever open your refrigerator to a TV camera. Just don't do that. And still today, 30 years later, people, even in Sweden, although everybody knows who I am, they don't know who I fuck. They don't know anything about my private life. And I'm proud of that, but it was strictly down to an advice that I got. I had my Luke at the time. It was like an older record producer who just taught me everything before I became successful, a mentor. And I think it's incredibly important. I think today what we learned after the first 30 years of the internet age is that the value of privacy and sacredness is bigger than ever. And I think Luke stands for that by precisely get the cameras and get the microphones and get those guys out of the house. So you can go online, be encrypted, communicate whatever you want, and nobody can eavesdrop on you. So you can keep your integrity intact, right? That's deeply human. I think it's absolutely necessary.
There is one other thing about the Karl Popper thing that I wanted to discuss, and then we're going to be closing this off. And again, I really appreciate Luke, Alexander, you guys being here today. So my question regarding the Karl Popper situation is, he was talking a lot about, writing a lot about comparing systems that used to exist before, whether we're talking about what Plato had in mind or various kings and dictators that happened to exist back then, comparing it to what was going on during his time with the rise of Adolf Hitler. And when we're talking about this organic society that he was talking about, I think his criticism may have been directed not so much towards people like Luke, for example, keeping the intranet and his private life separate, but criticism of this atavism, this atavistic tendency that a lot of people were showing during the time that he was writing the book, where they were looking towards the past and wanting that to be enforced. So I guess fascism, for lack of a better word. What do you guys think would happen there?
But the thing is that it's about construction. The book should be called The Pluralist Society in that case, and not the Open Society, right? The problem is not about openness. It's not about closeness at all. If you open up absolute everything, it's a very Christian fantasy in the sense that the curtain in the temple falls when Christ dies on the cross, and we can all look into the holy and the most sacred, and God is accessible to us all. I don't think that's the case. I think actually accessibility to something is completely dependent on your maturity, completely dependent on your archetype, completely dependent on if you're the right person to have access to something. And I think that makes sense, because otherwise we're going to have a society. If you go for anarchy completely, we will eventually force 2-year-olds to watch hardcore porn. That's exactly the argument against anarchy.
Yes.
And I think Luke agrees with me. You got to have some kind of an order to the chaos, otherwise society falls apart. And that order is precisely when you say no to that, no to that, no to that. And then you lock it up in different bottles because you can't get rid of it. But you lock it up in different bottles. It's only those who are experienced enough and have the right qualification can open that bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what we call the Bard Absolute in our philosophy. It's tied to membranics. It's like here, but not here yet, right? And this is what we need to institute. Now, it's going to be a long, hard-earned lesson to get these things right in the digital realm.
But before we end up instituting those things, at least what I notice, and Luke, you're aware of what's going on online. You are noticing this too, that there are a lot of people out there, a lot of young people who are very contrarian to the system today, and they want to not only destroy the system, but they do want to replace it by a fascist dictatorship. This isn't just something that I'm just saying willy-nilly. This is real people who are very frustrated with what's going on. And when they look at something like Karl Popper's criticism of the organic society, it seems like a lot of them end up looking towards places like Russia, for example, or any kind of dictatorial place, even China, where they say, well, at least they're being honest with how they run things, and they're attracted to that.
America's just full of really delayed teenage rebellions by incels, you know? That's where it's at to me.
But where do you think that? But do you think that's going to lead to somewhere? So, Luke, like, do you think that's going to lead to somewhere, or is that Alexander right that this is just like some people who are, have nothing better to do, so they're just complaining, and eventually nothing's really going to come from their complaining and wanting of fascism? He's thinking about it.
That's a good pose.
Yeah, that is a good pose for the interim time. And by the way, before Luke answers, as he's loading up here, once again, I want to thank Alexander and ask you, what are you working on right now? What do we have to look forward to from the great Alexander Bard in the next couple of weeks, months?
2 books. Process and Event, going to come out next year. Bard and Söderqvist. And then I'm working on a book with Cadel Last from Canada. Cadel is an amazing thinker. That book's called The Negatology. Hopefully also out next year.
Excellent. So back to Luke, you are back online. That would be my final question as far as whether you think this tendency that we're seeing online right now of a lot of young people looking towards something like a fascist system is something to pay attention to, or whether it's just people complaining because they're very online and they have something to say and they're going to say it and then it's going to change.
I mean, I don't really take anyone's professed political beliefs too seriously. I think especially because fascism has this, I don't know, this. It's kind of like everyone knows that it's kind of everyone is so vaccinated against it in our society. I think the natural assumption for many people is to assume that, well, there must be something to this. I think if they're in that state of rebellion. And I think, back in 2016, where this became a popular thing, people would, have all these kind of gas chamber memes and stuff like that. I think as they became more serious and more invested in politics, those jokes gradually started to evaporate. And I think people became more realistic. I guess they toned down the jokes and thought about what actually is going on. What does it even mean? I mean, to even do something like, what is for America? It has nothing to do. Our environment is entirely different. So it's not really. I mean, we're really just talking about aesthetics, and kind of very. So I don't really take. I don't really take any of that stuff too seriously.
I agree entirely. This is why woke is also. It's a laptop phenomenon. So what people do with the laptop without skin in the game, without doing physically, is not going to be that important. I think we're learning that very quickly at the moment. So people talk about these things, and then people get upset about it because they believe in the symbolic. And he used that word. It's very, very, it's very sissy. The whole thing. Like, oh, did you hear that word that he used? And then, of course, the contrarian reaction is that, oh, I'm going to be a fascist then. Well, you're not a fascist, the fucking laptop, It's not going to happen. But yeah, and some of those instances, they get a gun and do school shootings, and that's like the end of it. That's the tragedy of it. The fascist becomes a fucking isolated incel that kills kids at school. But that's not fascism. That's just a dialectical reaction to bullying from a guy who probably deserved it, right? It's just teenage shit. It's just not serious. I'm interested in the serious stuff. And in that case, I think the communist Chinese model today, they're selling to the rest of the world. We can now sell you equipment so you can control your population top down. That is the serious threat. That is the real fascism of our time. And it's not nice. And I'm very opposed to it. And that's the real problem. And America has to come up with its alternative. America has to find an identity of a digital America that defends freedom and openness and does so thoroughly. So it doesn't become a copy of communist China.
So you think that as far as Americans go, this is my last question to you, Alexander, do you think as far as Americans go, they should be concerned about what ends up happening in other parts of the world, be it like Russia, Ukraine, or China, or whatever, because at a certain point you think it does affect Americans, or is it possible to live independently of any of these world affairs that are going on? It's just
I think the people who call themselves liberals in America today are becoming so fucking militant that they are going for tyranny next. I think liberal tyranny is very much a likely scenario in America in the next 10 years.
Oh boy, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Well, with that, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Alexander, really appreciate you. Always love to have you on. Luke, it was a great pleasure to have you on. Really appreciate you took the time to speak with us today. So, listen, guys, where could we find what you are working on? Alexander, you already mentioned what you're working on. If you want to mention anything else, please go ahead. And anywhere
No,
else
I don't do sales pitches. If you're interested in my work, you can Google it yourself.
All right, Luke, anything you want to promote, anything that's heading our way from the great Luke Smith?
Well, I mean, my website is lukesmith.xyz. Everything's there. I don't know. I have a bunch of little things. So
Lindy Press. Lindy Press
Oh,
as
yeah,
well.
lindypress.net. That's a little business I have where I reprint out of print books. So you can go there if you want. But that's one of the things I do. So.
Excellent. I am all about that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Once again, please be sure to subscribe. Please be sure to go to patreon.com/breaktherules. Become a patron today. If you like beautiful wooden crafts that my father, Alexander Polyakov, makes, be sure to become a patron today. Here are the magnets. I know you can't see them right now, Luke, but believe me, they're very beautiful to look at. Those would be yours when you become a $20 tier patron, and $50 tier patron is going to give you a custom magnet. So whatever design you want to do, it's going to be done. I guarantee you. Thank you so much for watching.